You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology. Celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide, 800-610-7035. My email address is xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. That's xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And our radio site where you can listen to the X-Zone Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. until midnight, as well as during the rest of the 24-hour clock, the best of the X-Zone at www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is Dr. Kevin Randle, who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Iowa National Guard, as well as a very prominent and credible ufologist. Within the UFO community, he is often regarded as one of the leading experts on the reported crash of a UFO near Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947. That is also where Stanton Friedman was able to leave the universities as a nuclear physicist and take on the world, and promoting the city of Roswell as their ambassador to the stars. Well, that's it in a nutshell when it comes to Roswell. I've had the pleasure of having Kevin on the show many times. Did I get your rank right this time?
Yes, you did, and I'm very pleased with that.
Well, I don't like letting you down, Kevin. You know, I've got a lot of respect for the great work that you and other members of the military have done and are doing, and I always am very serious when I thank you for your service.
Well, I appreciate that.
Now, Roswell, New Mexico, it has been referred to by myself as the Mecca of ufology. All we need is Donald Trump to build a wailing wall, and you could have everybody go there, write their little ideas on a piece of paper and stick it in a crack. Well, wait a minute. No. Well, we know Trump would not have any cracks in his wall. So anyway, you have investigated Roswell inside and out, and has your idea or the way that you have perceived Roswell ever changed?
It is evolving. And I say that is 2 or 3 years ago, Tom Carey came to me and suggested we write the ultimate Roswell book. Well, that never came to fruition, but my plan had been to treat it as a cold case and go back and look at all the evidence that had been gathered and reevaluate it and see what we might have missed. And so that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Was anything missed?
Oh, quite a bit.
Really, eh?
The thing that pops immediately to mind is in 1978 they were doing an investigation, doing a documentary on Roswell, and Walter Haut was interviewed. And Haut said during that interview, recorded on videotape, that when he had been told about the press release that Blanchard wanted him to write, Colonel Blanchard wanted him to write, he asked Blanchard point blank, "Can I see it?" And Blanchard said no. Now we have the affidavit that he signed saying that he saw the bodies, he saw the craft and all of that. I mean, there's a very different point of view.
That's contrary to what was thought. Whatever happened to that program?
Well, that was part of the UFOs Are Real, I think, documentary about Stan Friedman that was put put together. Well, I'm not sure it was about Stan Friedman. It was a UFOs Are Real documentary, and Jesse Marcel was in it, and Walter Hott, and all these people were in it. But this was 1978, so we're getting a lot of this stuff before all the other evidence and all the other information came out. So we're getting a good look at what they had to say.
What else did you find? I'm going to give you a minute because I've got to take a commercial break.
Okay.
This is a very interesting topic. Once again, Kevin, always great having you on the show. And Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about Kevin, his blog spot is, just give me a sec, I've got it right here, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And Kevin and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone talking about the Roswell crash of 1947 here in the X Zone with Rob McConnell and my special guest, Dr. Kevin Randle. We'll be back on the other side. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Kevin Randle's our special guest this hour, Exonation, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. So here we are going back to 1978, and information is coming out that apparently is contradicting what the stories are or what people claim to be the facts are pertaining about the Roswell crash of 1947, Kevin. And what else were you able to find?
Well, we need to make one thing clear. In 1978, Walter Hott, who was a press officer, the public affairs officer at Roswell, was told to issue this press release about them having captured a flying saucer, and he maintained for years and years and years that was all he did, just put out the press release. In this interview in 1978, he'd taken it one step further and he'd asked Colonel Blanchard, "Can I see this?" And Blanchard said no. Then we get to 2002, and he creates this new affidavit saying that he'd seen the craft, seen the bodies, and all of this, which is a direct contradiction of this very definitive statement he'd made in 1978. So that creates kind of a problem with this new affidavit where Walter Hott talks about all this other stuff that he had seen and that he had done. It is completely different than what he had maintained for over 20 years. When we look at Jesse Marcel, Sr., Linda Corley interviewed him in 1984. I think she was living in Houma, Louisiana, which was the hometown of Jesse Marcel, and she sat down and recorded like 4 hours of interviews with him and then eventually did a book called For the Sake of My Country. And so we have that transcript of what Marcel had said to her, and there are things in there that just do not track with the documentation of things we can find. It suggests that Jesse Marcel tended to exaggerate things periodically, and that doesn't bode well for some of the Roswell case as well.
Is there any sign that there was collusion within the Roswell community, within the military community, to actually perpetrate a fraud?
I don't think there's a collusion to perpetrate a fraud. I think that they were presented with something they didn't quite understand. I have never really understood the press release, why they would issue that, because that opens the whole thing up. That gave us the door to go through. Had they not issued that press release, when Jesse Marcel was talking with his ham radio pals about having picked up pieces of a flying saucer, we would have had nowhere to go with it, because Marcel told Friedman in the very first interview, which was not recorded, that he didn't even remember when it happened. And it was a year later that Bill Moore stumbled across a newspaper article from 1947 July 8th, 9th, or 10th with Marcel's picture in it, and it allowed them to get a handle on it. So there were some problems with this whole thing, the way it developed.
One of the bones of contention I've had over the years is that Jesse Marcel, as base intelligence officer, is told to go to the Brazil farm. He picks up all this debris, puts it in his vehicle, and instead of going back to the base to maintain the chain of custody, he goes to his house, wakes up his wife and son, and lets them examine this evidence. How come nobody ever caught that before?
If we go back, well, actually, people did talk about that before. But if we go back and look at this interview that took place in 1978 with Jesse Marcel, he apparently gets home late in the evening, not in the middle of the night. And I suspect he went home because he disappeared overnight and was assuring his wife that everything was okay. And I think he probably called out to the base, and Blanchard said, what do you got? And he said, well, I got this debris. And he said, well, I'll bring it out tomorrow morning. According to the newspaper articles that published at the time, he went out to the base about 8:30 in the morning after having come back from the Brazil ranch and talked to Blanchard about it, and then they organized the press release. So a lot of the information that we had kind of accepted as, I guess, cast in stone turns out to be, when you look at the earlier interviews, isn't quite the same as what we've been told.
What do you think this new evidence will do to not only the case in Roswell, New Mexico, but the rest of ufology? Because what I'm hearing is that what was told is not what has happened. That even in the earliest days of ufology, there was the exaggeration of alleged events.
Well, I'm not sure in the early investigations, they didn't have a good handle on what they were talking about. And if you go look at the Roswell incident by Charles Berlitz and Bill Moore, and you look at the interviews conducted there are things that come out in that interview that have sort of fallen by the wayside. So as we relook at this stuff, we find that these things turn out to be much more important than we thought they were. And I think the point we've gotten to in the Roswell case is there has been promises of debris to be analyzed. During the 50th anniversary in 1997, there was a claim that they were going to bring a piece of debris that was clearly extraterrestrial in origin. The chain of custody had not been broken. They could had the proper provenance on it. They brought in a scientist to talk about his testing of it. And when we got through all of that, we found out that we didn't know who had the debris. There was no chain of custody. The scientist who tested it was not a teacher at the university he was at. He had some other function as a researcher, I suppose. But when you got to talk to him one-on-one, and they had spirited him out of Roswell quickly, so the reporters and everybody couldn't ask questions. But when you had an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one, which I did within days of this sort of thing, you found out that the isotopic ratios he talked about being extraterrestrial in origin, what he was trying to say was they were not naturally occurring on Earth, but they could be created in laboratories around Earth. So the isotopic ratio nonsense really didn't mean anything. And that whole piece of the Roswell case is nobody talks about that anymore. We had the Roswell slides last year where they had a picture of an alien, turned out to be a poor, unfortunate child who had died some 400 or 500 years ago.
The funny part is that we actually had that photo published in the X-Chronicles newspaper going back to 1997.
Seriously?
Seriously. As a hoax.
Are we talking about the same thing? Because the picture was that.
All right, the one that I'm recalling. It was laying down. It had a larger head. We showed it to somebody at McMaster University, the photo, and they said, "That's a human. It's mummified. It's a child."
The Roswell slide fiasco in Mexico City, where all was going to be revealed, blew up within 24 hours when they had an opportunity to read the placard that had been obscured in the slide. They got a better quality scan of the slide, and a dozen people around the world were able to read that placard by applying, I think it's Smart to Blur software on it, and they could read, this is a mummified child.
Yeah.
And then Tony Bagaglia found a document at one of the museums in the Four Corners area of the United States that talked about the recovery of the mummy, had pictures of it as they excavated it, had other pictures of it in the museum, and then they found a picture on a photo sharing website that had been taken in the museum that showed the same mummy. I don't know why those promoting it as something truly unusual hadn't been able to find it. I'd asked Tom Carey back in December before this whole thing came out in May. I said, "Are you sure it's not a mummy?" He said, "No, we've looked, we couldn't find, we haven't found it." And I think what they were doing was looking for that specific mummy, which they hadn't found. But anybody looking at the picture would see, well, this is clearly a mummified child.
Exactly, because I'm going to send you the photo that we've got.
Okay.
And we were, it was sent to us as proof of extraterrestrial existence, and I looked at it and I said, no, and then I had a friend who was working at McMaster University in the medical departments, and I brought it to him, and he looked at it and he said, that's a mummified child.
Well, that's what this turned out to be, and what is extraordinary is the whole thing blew up within 24 hours.
Yeah.
They had been providing scans to people to try to deblur this placard that was associated with the mummy, but the guys who owned it had manipulated so it couldn't be deblurred. Once they got a higher quality scan, they read it immediately.
Yeah. So when we take a look at this mummy, who was that was purportedly an extraterrestrial, when we look at the facts that are coming out about the Roswell incident, what does this do for the credibility of ufology?
Well, you can look at it two ways, I think. One of it should suggest that there's a great deal of credibility going on because we keep researching these things and finding answers and providing them. The other thing that you can say is, well, it just shows that there's an awful lot of credulous research that went on in the past, and it's only now that we're taking a good scientific look at it.
But doesn't that open the Pandora box to questions? Well, if all these alleged cases and alleged evidence turns out to be answerable, then maybe UFOs and extraterrestrials do not exist.
The thing you have to remember on the Roswell case, we do not have any physical evidence. We do not have any photographs. We do not have any government documents. We have some testimony from people that is interesting. And when I say that, is every member of Colonel Blanchard's staff we were able to interview, except one man, said this thing was extraterrestrial. And so we have that body of testimony. But when we get down to the bottom line, that's all we have. And I think of the testimony of Edwin Easley, who retired as an Air Force colonel, who had been the provost marshal in Roswell at the time, talking to me about this. I find his testimony very credible, saying that suggesting it was alien.
All right, stand by, Kevin. You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour for the news. X-Zone Nation. Kevin Randle is our special guest. www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And Kevin and I will be back on the other side of the news. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Exonation, Kevin Randle is our guest this hour. www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, so what else are you going to be presenting to the public that that hasn't been brought forward before since you've started your cold case investigation into Roswell?
Well, we've tried to, or I've tried to, look at some of the witnesses that have come forward and what credibility they may have, what their story is, looking at just a whole bunch of cases, people saying things about the case, being involved in it, seeing the craft, seeing the bodies, but you look at their stories and you realize they don't really track, but when they're talking about Roswell, you get a lot of reporters who just pick up the stuff loosely. And what I'm thinking of is there was a woman named Ann Robbins who was at the dedication of the Odessa Meteor Crater Museum in Odessa, Texas, and claimed that her husband had gone out overnight when this thing crashed and had seen the craft and the bodies. And you look at the write-up in the paper, they quote, Frank Kaufman said this. Frank Kaufman has been considered a non-credible source for 15 years, and yet he's still being quoted. So I'm trying to eliminate that sort of thing from the discussion by pointing out, here's what we know about this. Here's how this came about. This is what it means to us in the investigation.
So you've got a lot of contradictory evidence. And does this point to the fact that there was an extraterrestrial UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico, or was it some other craft that could very well have been terrestrial?
There is no evidence that it was any kind of terrestrial craft. The Air Force, when they did their investigation back in the mid-1990s, eliminated everything from experimental aircraft and that sort of thing, and settled on this Project Mogul flight. But if you look at the documentation for the Project Mogul flight, it was canceled. So that explanation is also eliminated. What we've done is we've eliminated all the terrestrial explanations. There is nothing left to look at. We're stuck with that. But now we only can go back to the testimony of the people who were there and who talked about this thing, and whether or not their stories have changed, whether they've embellished their stories, whether they've grown, or whether they've stayed pretty much consistent with what they said 15, 20, 30 years ago.
But without having any evidence to substantiate the claims that there was in fact debris, what does this do for the case?
Well, the evidence suggests there was debris. We just don't have it. And you could argue, and it's a lame argument at this point, that the government picked up the debris, and that's why we haven't been able to get a hold of it. The thing that we look at is all these people who've talked about having debris, have saved pieces of the debris. Somehow we can never get to that point. And I think that was why Tom Carey got so excited about the Roswell slides, is because here finally was something tangible. Here is something that we can look at. It can be analyzed and say yes or no. And he got overwhelmed by his own belief structure, his own enthusiasm for the case, and let that get away from him. And when you reduce it to its bottom line, all we have is the testimony of the people who were there, that we can prove that were there in 1947. And there's a lot of people who said, well, I was there in 1947, and we can't document that they were there. And that harms the case too, because everybody looks at it and says, well, these guys were all lying about it. That's not really true either. But the bottom line is all we have is the testimony of the people who were there in 1947. And you can say, well, that's not enough, or you can say, well, that's fine for me. You've got to establish your own bar for the quality of the evidence, but all we really have is a testimony.
And I would imagine it's very important that the Roswell case be kept alive, because it is the cornerstone of modern ufology.
It has become that way. I think, personally, a much better case is the Levelland sightings from November of 1957, because you have multiple chains of evidence there, and you've got it well documented by the Air Force and UFO research organizations, not the same way as what happened in Roswell. Well, we've got a flying saucer. Well, no, we really don't. It's just a weather balloon. And you didn't have a lot of that testimony gathered in 1947 like you would have. You didn't have the reporters finding Jesse Marcel and talking to him in 1947 because he was off in Fort Worth. You didn't have the people talking to Mac Brazel because the military held him at the base for a period of time, and then he was at his ranch where there was no phone and no radio. So you've got all those problems that didn't exist in 1947, but you look at some of the cases that have happened since then, and Levelland is a prime example. You've got that kind of documentation, and you've got multiple chains of evidence. At Levelland, it clearly interacted, it being the flying saucer, the UFO, clearly interacted with the environment, stalling car engines, causing radios to fill with static, fading traffic lights. And you had people at 13 separate locations, as near as I can tell, unrelated to one another, talking about the same sort of phenomenon within a period of like 90 minutes. So you've got a much more solid case there. Roswell became the standard bearer because there was the possibility of the debris. There was a possibility of photographs of the alien creatures. There was possibility of government reports that would tell us those sorts of things. And none of that has come to fruition. And there's an awful lot of us who've looked at it for 25, 30, 40 years.
But once again, when you look at all the other hoaxes that have been perpetrated over the years, Kevin, it's no wonder that people really don't take, the majority of people really don't take ufology as serious. You had the alien autopsy film, and then you've got the other reports that have just proven to be nothing. And you've got people who are in the UFO arena to make money. And I'm not talking about the authors. I'm talking about the people who go to the lectures, the seminars. My God, even the former deputy prime minister of Canada and the minister of defense, Paul Hellyer, has thrown his hat into the UFO scenario.
Yes, and you've got an awful lot of people coming forward telling stories, and you're saying, well, they're credible because they were high-ranking military officers. And the one that springs to my mind immediately is Robert Willingham, who claimed to be a fighter pilot and a retired Air Force colonel, talking about this cockamamie crash down in the Del Rio area of Texas. And you find out that his military career lasted 13 months. He rose to the rank of E4, which is a very low-ranking enlisted man. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Civil Air Patrol, which is a Air Force auxiliary, but it's a civilian organization. You're not paid for it. You don't get retirement points. They do a wonderful job on search and rescue, which is one of their missions. They do a great job of training young people about aviation subjects and giving them an opportunity to learn how to fly and that sort of thing. But it's certainly not the same as being an Air Force colonel fighter pilot. And that whole thing, his whole story collapsed when we discovered that. And you can see in the pictures, there's pictures of him from the 1960s. One of them, he's in a Civil Air Patrol uniform. In another one, he's taken the CAP off the lapels of his uniform. And you can see where the holes were, where he pulled them off. So he's having a picture. So he can say, well, here I am as an Air Force officer. And what this does also is take down MJ-12, because the Eisenhower briefing document has a paragraph about that case, which is a blatant hoax that began in 1968. And the Eisenhower briefing document was supposedly created in 1952. And the guys who created it, if they were who they were supposed to be, meaning insiders in the UFO field preparing a document for President-elect Eisenhower, they would have known that case is a hoax. And it's left out. It's not left out. It's in the document, and that takes the whole thing down.
So if we're looking at all the high-profile cases that really didn't happen, what is left for the credible UFO community to say, listen, not everything's a hoax. This is legitimate. What's left?
Levelland. I think Rendlesham Forest, the Bentwaters case.
Yeah.
The RB47 case looks good. The other problem on the other side of the coin is the skeptics throwing a lot of mud at the UFO cases, and it turns out some of the things they're saying are simply not true. The Coyne helicopter case from Ohio in 1973, I think it was, Philip Glass decided it was a meteor. If you go back and you look at it, you discover the thing was in sight for 5 minutes. It maneuvered around the helicopter and that sort of thing. So you've got these wonderful cases like that that have been overshadowed by Roswell because the potential of Roswell was so great. So you've got to look at all of that sort of thing. So the skeptics haven't done a good job either. I just did on my blog a couple of things about skeptical arguments for in the Roswell case that don't pan out either. So you've got both sides of the coin. The line is sort of down the middle, but the Roswell case is losing its importance because we haven't found the documentation, we haven't found the physical evidence, the pieces of the craft.
Tell me, do you think that evidence really does exist?
I suspect it does, and I suspect that it's being well guarded. I mean, there are secrets that have been kept for decades, even when it was no longer important to keep the secrets. I think the MK Ultra, the decoding of the German High Command classified messages during World War II, that was kept secret for an awfully long time after the war was over because of just because.
Sure.
And so we can see that a large number of people can keep a secret if they're convinced the secret is important enough.
What about all the claims by certain factions of the UFO community that there has been a lot of reverse engineering of the extraterrestrial crafts that have been recovered that are used in modern day technology? And when you ask or challenge the claims, they get really pissed off.
I don't think that we've reversed engineered anything from it. If you look at one of the things that we're talking about, the invention of the transistor,
right.
But we see no quantum leap in the invention of the transistor, and you can go back and you can research the history of the research that produced that, and you can see it preceded Roswell, and there was no quantum leap in our technology that you would expect if we could do that. I've always said that if we've got a craft, I don't think we figured out the technology yet, and the best analogy I can think of is if you take a VCR, and I use VCR because it's more fun than a DVD, a VCR, a TV, and a power pack back to Merlin the Magician, and you show him this black ribbon, you say, okay, decode it. To do that, he's got to understand two things that are invisible, electricity and magnetism. And I suspect that a technology that even is 100 years advanced from us might be almost impossible for us to decode. And if we take our technology today back to 1950 and we show them these little silver discs, they've got to understand an awful lot of things to decode the information on those silver discs, which of course we know as DVDs.
Right.
So it's and a civilization that has figured out interstellar flight is going to have a technology that far exceeds ours. And I think that technology may just be like magic to us. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said that if technology far enough advanced would be like magic. And look at the things we can do. My cell phone is more powerful than the Star Trek communicator.
Yeah.
Because I've got the entire knowledge of the human race in that cell phone. And we look at how our technology is advanced. I mean, the technology of the television sets, our laptop computers. You and I are talking on Skype, and if we wanted to, we could do it visually with looking at one another. So the idea of the picture phones that just never seem to develop. Well, we really kind of got that, don't we?
Sure do.
It just didn't go the way people thought it would. And so I'm just thinking that the technology may be so far advanced we haven't figured it out. But I see no evidence that anything recovered has been back engineered into our society. So if you've got something that made a quantum leap, sudden revelation, some kind of a discovery that seems impossible to understand, then you would have something. But all the examples they have brought forward, you can see the evolution of that technology as we developed it.
what about this case that I believe is a hoax? I've talked to many members of the UFO community, and they concur. The case of the planet Serpo.
You mean that hoax?
Yeah. Why do people buy into that, Kevin?
It fills some sort of a need for them, I guess, that they want to believe that this technology is out there and maybe it will save mankind from the crises that the news media keeps creating for us. If you go back and you read the science fiction from the 1950s, and it's a story set into the future, beyond the year 2000, almost universally they talk about the Great Atomic War, which of course never happened or hasn't happened yet. And I think that they look at that as some kind of a salvation for them. I don't understand that either. There was a thing on television not long ago about this guy who claimed that he was abducted as a 17-year-old, put into an alien military, spent most of his career on Mars, served 20 years on Mars or on the moon, and then came back home and was ejected back into his 17-year-old body, so he was gone like 15 minutes. And people are buying this story?
Oh, I know. In fact, I had a guest on the show 2 weeks ago who told me that the military really is not going to the Middle East. They are actually going to Mars to fight with the good extraterrestrials against the bad extraterrestrials. And
that's all true.
Now, wait a sec. When they come back, they are brainwashed, and this is what is causing the PTSD.
Well, yeah, that's all true. I mean that's what happened to me.
I knew it.
No, I shouldn't say that because somebody's gonna blog tomorrow. Kevin Randle said that.
Yeah. But
he was one of those that went to Mars.
But Kevin, how stupid?
Being Matt Damon.
How stupid do they think people really are? And I'm going to give us a couple of minutes to think this over because I have to take another commercial break, our final break for this hour. Exonation, Dr. Kevin Randle is our very special guest, a good friend of the Exxon. His blog spot is kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and Kevin and I will be back on the other side of this short break, so whatever you do, don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back. Dr. Kevin Randle is our special guest, a good friend of the X-Zone. As always, Kevin, time goes by so fast, my friend, when you're on the show. Visit Kevin's blog site, everyone. It's kevinrandle.blogspot.com. There's a lot of things going on today, Kevin. And yet here we have all this massive handheld technology. We have high-definition cameras. We have street cams. We have webcams. We have surveillance cameras, and yet no one has taken that all-proving photo or video of a UFO, of an extraterrestrial craft.
I think the problem there may be that some of the pictures have been taken, but there are people who believe there is no alien visitation. Right. Therefore, anything that suggests otherwise has got to be a hoax, and they throw that up there, and it kind of confuses the issue. If we could get a legitimate investigation, a dispassionate investigation, then I think that we might find some of that. What is really disturbing is everybody's got a camera in their phone, for crying out loud, that can take amazing video, and we don't have anything that is not overly credible at this point. I try to stay away from those things because it's a 10-year-old kid with a video camera can make an incredible CGI video that is almost would defeat people trying to debunk it.
Kevin, what are your final thoughts that you'd like to share with the Exo Nation tonight? First of all, let me ask you, where are your books available?
I think the best one is the government UFO files that came out just a few years ago, and it was followed up by the UFO dossier.
Yes.
They sort of go together. You get them at Amazon. You can buy them as ebooks and read them like in 10 seconds. Here, you get them in 10 seconds. So those things, and they're on the blog spot as well.
All right, and what I'm going to do later on tonight is I'm going to send you that photo that you and I were talking about earlier tonight.
Okay.
And what are your final thoughts? We've got about a minute, Kevin.
The ufology is evolving to the point where I think we're getting more dispassionate in our research, and it's becoming better. And then we're getting more answers to questions. So we're eliminating some things, but there's still a core of very interesting sightings that seem to be inexplicable.
And that's it.
That's it.
What did you think about the X-Files coming back on TV? The 6-part series.
I have not yet watched all the episodes. I watch them on demand, so I haven't seen them. I've seen the first 2, but Mulder is really old.
Oh, hasn't he? Eh?
Yeah.
God, I honestly didn't recognize him.
Yeah, he was kind of hard to recognize.
Maybe he's an alien.
Oh, I think that's true. Him and Scully both.
Yeah. Who knows? So many people actually believe that the reptilians have taken over the bodies, and
Kevin, that was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was a fine movie remade like 7,000 times.
You and I have got to talk again because I thoroughly enjoy our conversations, my friend. I want to thank you once again, Kevin, for being on the show, and once again, thank you for your service to your country.
Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
You take care, my good friend.
You too.
Exonation. Good night, Kevin. The one and only Dr. Kevin Randle. www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And don't forget, his books are available on Amazon.com. I'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.